background person in West Coast Pride, but you're actually not an LGBT person yourself.
No, that's right.
So why did you go into this?
I went into this because I wanted to help Christian, who is one of my buddies from other associations, who said I want to do a Pride association on the west coast of Denmark. And I told him, well, in order to make this successful, you need to formally create the association, and you need to apply for funding and those kinds of things. And then he said, well, you work with these kinds of things professionally, so could you please help us get this these formal tasks over with? Because he's quite young. He was 19 at the time. I said, yeah, sure, I'll help you with this. And then we started the association, and I was on board for a few meetings, and then Christian had to go abroad for traveling. And then the rest of the group sat around the table and thought about how to move on now that Christian weren't there. And then they pointed to me and said, well, you've actually been quite good at applying for funding, and you have an overview of the formal stuff, an overview of the mail system and that kind of thing. So if I could chair the association. And then I had a little bit of second thought, because as you say, I'm not an LGBT person myself. So I asked the rest of the group, would you be happy to be represented by me as I guess in the rainbow flag I would be gray, living here with my wife Karen and our little son in a very boring neighborhood. There's not a lot of glitter or glamour about our life, but they were quite happy about that, because in our association it's actually quite an important value that we work together across sexuality and gender identity, wanting to promote LGBT welfare on the west coast of Denmark. And that's not something we believe that we can succeed with if we only work within the LGBT community. We need to get everyone on board. We need to get the conservative Christian minorities on board. We need to get the cultural institutions on board. We need to get schools and local politicians and sport clubs on board. So in that way, our association resembles our goal in the local community.
Well, for your association, you kind of started out with something completely different than what you are today. Can you try to put some light on what the first thoughts were and how it has evolved into what you are today?
Yeah. Well, when Christian first started talking about creating this association, West Coast Pride, he was talking about how he felt like there must be a lot of homophobia on the West Coast. There must be a lot of transphobia. There must be a lot of prejudice in general, because that's the perception that he had, that I shared with him, that everyone in the group actually shared with him, that being in rural areas of the country, and not just in Denmark but anywhere, is associated with being somewhere with more prejudice, where people maybe resemble each other more, and then where they don't like people who are different. So that was our perception. We thought we're going to be a protest group who are protesting that we want diversity in this very monotone area. And we were a little bit scared about that. My mother told me, be careful when you go out there and represent West Coast Pride, because people are going to come after you. They're going to say ugly stuff about you, and maybe it'll get harder for you to find a job or whatever. And then quite quickly thereafter we realized maybe the story needed nuance, because when we took contact to local politicians and asked them, do you want to help us with our project, they said yes, of course. And they wrote a piece for the local newspaper. We support West Coast Pride, and we think it's great that they started the association. And we went to the cultural institutions. They were like, yeah, sure, we want to be on board. And what do you want to do? Is it a concert? Is it do you want to have an author come visiting and tell about their books, or do you want a theater play? So everyone was sort of on board, and when we asked local companies, they said, sure, we just need to know what you want to do with us, and we will be happy to help you. So everywhere we went, more or less, we were welcomed with open arms, and that made us realize our job is perhaps not to protest against prejudice, but to make it very apparent for everyone that this is a cause that we can actually come together behind, so that we can do away with the problems that we still have, despite maybe not having all the prejudice. We still have problems with minority stress and with higher suicide rates among LGBT people, and anxiety and depression and sexual assaults and workplace discrimination and feeling alone in public schools. All these issues are still there, despite perhaps not the prejudice being very prevalent. So there's still a task to work on, but thankfully now we know that there's a lot of people who want to help us work on this task if we ask them.
Like how, again, like you're talking about the politicians and all the people with entrepreneurs and stuff like that. How have the regular people in the area actually seen you guys? Have they been like very positive about it, or have you guys met any struggles when it comes to that? Or
right when we founded the association, I think some of the people who might have something against us, which I think is a minority, they wrote 2 or 3 pieces in the local newspaper about how they thought, now this is unnecessary. There's no need for an association like this. We don't have any issues with LGBT discrimination at all, and this is being hysterical, because if there is an issue, it's for a very small proportion of the population, and it's taking way too much of the public conversation space, sort of. So there were 2 or 3 comments in the local newspaper. But then the newspaper editor came out and said, well, we support the association. And the mayor came out and said, we support the association. And all these local businesses. And I think that has made the people who have something against it realize maybe it's okay that we don't support it, or okay for themselves, but let's not make it a public business, because obviously this is something that the local community actually want to work on in some way or other. So just like if you don't want to play badminton, that's fine. You don't have to go and tell people they shouldn't play badminton. Just stay out of it. And then of course, there's social media. And if we put up a post about what we want to do in this Culture Week for West Coast Pride, there are 2 or 3 people who write negative comments about it. But my experience is also that if I contact them and I say, I'm sorry to hear that you don't like what we're doing, but I would welcome you to come and meet with me and have a cup of coffee, and we can discuss what we're doing and why we think it's important. They always say, no, that's all right. It's fine if you delete my comment on social media, and you do your stuff in West Coast Pride, and I'll leave you alone. So we can always find a middle ground that is, maybe I don't like it, but I won't protest it.
just a final question. How do you see like West Coast Pride in, let's say, 5 years from now?
It depends a little bit, because we're also doing, work with the local politicians, as I said, where we're trying to keep them up to what's actually the promise in the Danish school charter, that they have to also teach diversity. And right now we are invited for a meeting with the local politicians about how can we implement that in the local schools on the West Coast. And if they move fast and in September they start making changes in the schools, then of course that's an item less on our agenda. And we've just had a meeting with local politicians about what can we do on the local workplaces, and they seem to want to start a conversation about this as well. So I mean, it depends entirely on how far along ending discrimination and making LGBT people completely included on the West Coast are we. And if they're entirely included, then we probably won't do more political work. We might not do more of the cultural awareness work that we do, because it might be just a natural part of what our cultural institutions do. They might think themselves, oh, we need to also have LGBT artists at the concert place and LGBT authors in the local library. So we won't need to sort of push that agenda. And then if that's the case, what we will keep doing is having a place where people of all sexualities and genders can come together and meet in a safe space where you can feel like maybe if your family is not being very inclusive of who you are, then you can come to this place and meet other people who will welcome you. And maybe it's a place where you can hear about people's stories about coming out of the closet and think about, is that something for me as well? Or you can meet people who are, bisexuals, and if you're curious, am I also, you can talk to them and then find out maybe this is also what I am, maybe I'm something else. So we'll still have a meeting place in 5 years' time, at least. And if there is work to do on the political agenda, then we'll work on that. And if there's work to do in the cultural institutions, we'll keep working on that.
Emil, I was thinking, what does the pride flag mean to you as a front person of a pride?
I think to me and the rest of the group in West Coast Pride, it means diversity. We chose to use the old original pride flag with the 5 or 6 colors that are all the rainbow colors. Not because all colors are there, but because it shows difference. And it celebrates the difference, and it gives equal space for the colors of that are in the flag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you see the pride flag as a political statement or just a flag that includes everybody?
I think those two things are not necessarily existing. To me, the pride flag and the LGBT cause is political. That's if you look at global politics and you see the way that LGBT people are discriminated differently and have different rights across the globe, to me it's quite apparent that it is a political issue. But at the same time, I think as a political issue about how to include people based on their sexuality, and it might as well be ethnicity or race or political standpoint. It's at a foundation, a valuable foundation for the way we do politics in Europe. Mm-hmm. At least that's something we want to be held up to, a standard we want to be held up to. So I think it is political, but it's at the same time the foundation of the way we do politics in the EU and that we try to promote outside of the EU.
Okay. Well, that actually leads to my last question. Like, we had the European Championships in football, and the stadium in Munich was not allowed to have the rainbow colors on their stadium. And we also had an incident in Baku where a pride flag was taken away from some people in there watching football. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the UEFA foundation that held the European Championships in football should have stepped up against this and said, this is clearly someone trying to promote LGBT rights and to stand up against LGBT discrimination. And that might be a political issue, but it's also an issue that should be at the core of what the UEFA is as well. So they should have stood up against this and said, sure, Munich can put rainbow colors on the stadium, and in Baku they shouldn't be allowed to remove rainbow flags from people, because it's a strong symbol of inclusion and what should be at the core value of the European Championships in football, just as it is in the EU. And maybe they can't live up to that all the time, but it should be the standard that they're aiming for.